1 Kings 7. Solomon starts to build his house now. He got the temple built. But Solomon took 13 years to build his own house. So he finished all his house. He also built the house of the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits in width. That would be 150 feet. And 50 cubits in height, that's 75 feet, and 30 cubits with 4 rows of cedar plank pillars and cedar beams on the pillars. It was paneled with cedar above the beams that were out of 45 pillars, 15 in a row. There are windows with beveled frames in the 3 rows and windows with opposite windows in the 3 tiers. And all the doorways and doorposts had rectangular frames, and the windows were opposite windows in 3 tiers. He also made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits, 75 feet, and the width was 30 cubits, which would be 45 feet. And in front of them was the pinnacle with pillars and canopies was in front of them. Then he made half the throne, the hall of judgment, where he might judge, and it was paneled with cedar from floor to ceiling. And the house he dwelt at another court inside the hall. And like workmanship, Solomon also made his house like the hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he has taken to wife. All these were in costly stone, cut to size, trimmed with saws, inside and out, from the foundation to the eaves, and also on the outer side, a great court. The foundation was a costly stone, large stones, some 10 cubits, that's 15 feet, and some 8 cubits, which would be 12 feet. And above were costly stones honed in the size of cedar wood. A great wall was closed with 3 rows of honed stones and a row of cedar beams. So were the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibles of the temple. So, this thing's huge. It's actually twice the size of the temple. And it took twice as long to build the temple. You know, they don't know. They're trying to figure out, because they talk about 3 different buildings. Were they all the same building or weren't? They don't actually know. They could have been, or they could have been separate. But all that's all. But they think maybe this would be the start of his fall. Because what did he do? He spent more time on his house of dwelling for his own personal pleasure than what he did for the temple. He spent twice as much time for his pleasure. And we're told not to do that. So this is where they think he started falling, because he took more time to do all that. And Solomon, you know, at the end, when you start thinking about that, what did he say? He said, I built buildings in Lamentations. He says, I built buildings and I wasn't happy. I built things to myself. So it actually says he did do a lot of this stuff for his self-pleasure. And he says it was worthless. But then you get here in verse 13. Then King Solomon brought Amaris from Tyre. He was the son of a widow from the tribe of Nephtali, and his father's name was Tyre, a bronze worker. He was filled with wisdom and understanding, and skilled in the work with all kinds of bronze. So he came to the King Solomon and did all the work. So wait a minute, this kid, he's a son of a widow. So that means his father passed away, didn't he? This makes it so, it shows us, even when we don't have a father to show us, we can still do great things. We shouldn't let things get us down. And this is one of the things, they brought up his name, and they can't, it's the only thing most people, whenever they study this, could even think about. Why would they bring up his name and say, he was the son of a widow? Because as they look at him, he was a really good, skilled bronze worker. And in verse 15, and he cast 2 pillars of bronze, each one weighing a cubic height and line of 12 cubits, measuring the circumference of each. Then he made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on top of the pillars. The height of the capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the capital was 5 cubits. He made a lattice network with wreaths of chainwork for the capital, which were on top of the pillars. 7 chains for one capital, and 7 for the other capital. So he made the pillars and 2 rows of pomegranates above the network, all around the cover, the capital. That were on top, and those he did for other capitals. The capitals which were on top of the pillars in the hall were in the shape of lilies, 4 cubits. The catapults and the 2 pillars also had pomegranates above. For the covec surface, which was next to the network, and there were 200 such pomegranates in rows of each of the catapults all round. Then he set up the pillars by a vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillars on the right and called the name Joshua. And he set upon a pillar on the left, called his name Boaz. The top of the pillars were the shape of lilies, so the work of the pillars was finished. And the reason the names of them pillars are trying to find the Hebrews. I had it there and then I moved it. The meaning of Jacob was he is established. And the meaning of Boaz is in him is strength. Now they would have known that from their language, and they knew what the name of the pillars were. And that was a reminder that God was established there, and in him is our strength. So every time they went in, they'd see them. And that was to remind them. That's why they named them each one of those pillars when they went in. And that was an important thing. But then, and in verse 23, it made the seat of cast bronze, 10,000 cubits from one brim to the other. It was completely round. Its height was 5 cubits, which would be 7.5 feet. And a line of 30 cubits measured its circumference. So there's 45 feet around. Below its brim were ornaments of buds encircled it all around, 10 to a cubit, all the way around the sea. The ornament buds were cast in 2 rows. When it was cast, it stood 12 oxen, 3 looking towards the north, 3 looking towards the west, 3 looking towards the south, and 3 looking towards the east. The sea was set upon them, and all their back parts pointing inwards. It was a handbreadth thick, and its brim was shaped like the brim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It contained 2,000 baths. 2,000 baths means it had about 12,000 gallons of water. This thing was high. And the reason they did that is because the priest would have to wash their hands beforehand, before they did anything, and wash their feet. And when a priest was ordained, when they first bring him in, they actually washed his whole body. They gave him a shower. Now they try to figure out, and they haven't been able to figure out because none of the other temples had this bath in it. This is the only one that had it. They don't know if there's a way they could get in it because there's no ladder or anything. They don't know. Or maybe they had something like a spigot or something that they could turn on and off and get the water out of it. It would have been like a great big hot tub. And there, as you try finding out about it, nobody really knows, except for what it says here, a whole lot about it. It's one of those things that, as you do research on it, it's confusing. Because like they said, it was so high, you couldn't climb up in it. But then they were trying to figure out exactly how they were using it. They knew it was the water for cleaning the priest, though. They knew that, for making them ceremonial clean. So it could have had like spigots and they could have washed their hands and feet, or we're not sure.
Wow.
And then in verse 22, it says, Saul in prayer with dedication installed and stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of all the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands toward heaven. And he said, oh, wait a minute, I'm way over here. What am I doing? Verse 27, he also made 10 carts of bronze, 4 cubits with length of each chart, 4 cubits in width and cubits in height. And this was the design of the cart. They had panels, and panels were between the frames. On the frames, there were between the frames was lions, oxen, and cherubs, and all the frames was pedestals on top. Below the lion and oxen were wreaths of plaited work. Every cart had 4 bronze wheels, axles of bronze, and in its 4 feet had support under the laver, were supported of cast bronze beside each wreath. It opened side to crown on the top, with 1 cubit in diameter. An open was round shaped like a pedestal. 1.5 cubits on the outside diameter, also in the opening, were engraved, but the panels were square, not round. Under the panels were 4 wheels, and the oxen's wheels were joined to the carts. The height of the carts was 1.5 cubits. The workmanship of the wheels was like a workmanship of a chariot wheel. Their axle pins, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all cast bronze. And there was 4 supports at the 4 corner of each cart. Its support was part of the cart itself. On the top of the cart, a height and a half of the cubit was perfectly round, and on top of the cart, it was flanged and panel were all the same casting. And the plates of the flange and the panels were engraved with cherubs, lions, and tall palm trees, where there was a clear space on each with a wreath all round. Thus he made 10 carts. All of them were in the same mold, 1 measure and 1 shape. Then he made 10 lavers of bronze. Each laver contained 4 baths, and each laver was 4 cubits of each cart was a layer. And he put 5 carts on the right side of the house and 5 on the left side of the house. He set the sea on the right side of the house towards the southeast. Then furnishing the temple, Homer made a laver, a shovel, and bowls. So Homer finished doing all the work that was to do for the King Solomon, for the house of the Lord. The 2 panels and the 2 bowls shaped catapults, and were on top of the 2 pillars, and 2 networks covered the 2 bowls shaped catapults, which were at the top of the pillars. 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 bowl-shaped catapults, and were on the top of the pillars. The 10 carts and 10 lavers of the carts, 1 seat and 12 oxen under the seat, the pots and the shovels, the bowls. All these articles with Harmon made for the king, Solomon, for the house of the Lord, were burnished bronze. And the plans for Jordan the king had them the clay bowls between Sasha and Zerah. And Solomon did not weigh all the articles because there was too many. The weight of the bronze was not determined. So they had so much bronze, they didn't even take the time to weigh it. That's how much bronze they used here. There was so much of it. Thus Solomon had all the furnishing made for the house of the Lord, and the altar of gold and table of gold, which was showbread, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left side, and the front of the lamp and the wicker trimmed of gold, the basins and the trimming bowl, the ladles and the censers and the pure gold, and the hinges of gold, both on the doors of the inner room, the most holy place, and for the Lord of the main hall of the temple. So all the work that King Solomon had done for the house of the Lord was finished, and Solomon brought all in the things which his father David had dedicated, the silver and the gold and the furnishings. He put them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. So Solomon took all the stuff that David had. David knew he could never build a temple because he was a man of war. So it was his son's job to do all this. And this was all of his plans. And it's all done now. This is the inner temple. Just imagine how beautiful it will look. I mean, Bert has a outline what they thought it would look like. There's the temple and all that, and house. You can see it up there. Wow. It's huge. And that's where we're going to end tonight. Let's go to prayer.